This is Gotham Investigations, and I'm your host, Jeff Giordano, the Scorned Women of Miami. If your sink and pipe is leaking, you call a plumber. If your cabinet breaks, you call a handyman. We're going to reach into our Italian bag of tricks and tell you who to call when your relationship is going bad. And that's an Italian psychotherapist. So we don't just call an Italian when we need them to make love to our women when we're not around. We call them to help us on our relationships. Stay tuned. You're going to love this episode. Relationships gone bad. But there's a way you could mend your relationship before it turns disastrous. We have a special guest on our show today, Stefano Fanfoni. And he is going to take you through some steps and some guidance. Stefano is a psychotherapist and a hypnotherapist that specializes in family relationships. Welcome to our show.
Hello, Jeff. Thank you for having me.
Tell us a little bit about yourself and your practice and how somebody can get a hold of you if they wanted to seek assistance from you.
So let's start from the practice. You already covered all the credentials. Psychotherapist, I think, is the umbrella term, and marriage and family therapy is the more specialized degree. You know, I'm finishing, as we spoke, finishing the PhD in marriage and family therapy. It's a little bit of a limiting label. In fact, our colleagues in Europe, they named the field systemic relational therapy, because their understanding is that individuals live in a system. One of the system is the couple, the relationship. Slightly bigger is the family, extended families, society, and so all these systems that play a part in what the individual experience is.
So what is the name of your website if somebody were to seek your help, and your phone number to contact you?
My website is therapeutictalk.org, and my phone number is 973-873-4445.
How many locations do you have here in Miami area?
I'm just now finalizing the process for the second location, which is in Miami. The first original location was in Fort Lauderdale. So I'll be located in the Design District in Miami.
Fantastic. And you also have capability now, which many businesses do, to do these sessions on Zoom.
Yes, very much so. Clients are actually the ones asking for it, the conveniency of it, and not just time-wise, but also the conveniency of being in your own space when you're having a delicate and intimate conversation. I think is winning. And
tell us a little bit about yourself. You were born in Italy.
Born and raised in Cremona, Italy. It's in the north of Italy, just south of Milan. And that's where all my family is.
And you also specialize in therapy for sports players, professional sports players. I see that you have a little history yourself of being a professional soccer player. Tell us a little bit about that.
Yes. Well, I think that niche is a little bit of a default for me, since, as you mentioned, I'm a former professional soccer player back home in Italy. And and through soccer or football, that's how I came to America first. And so a lot of my clients tend to be in the athlete world. Now, growing up, I think the new version of being an athlete is to be a driven professional, regardless of, not necessarily a sport professional. So I'm working a lot with lawyers, with other therapists, with business owners who have that same drive. I think that I relate to, as a professional athlete.
And it's so important that you've been there. You experienced that. You experienced the stress levels, the demand on sports, the demand on winning. That you can put yourself in not only the shoes of a top athlete, but the shoes of a child that might have high expectations, and the family might hold high expectations that gets them into that mode where they need therapy.
Yeah, definitely. I don't consider myself a top athlete, but definitely being exposed to 15,000 people watching you, and it's a formative, to say the least, experience, and that's where the fun begins.
Now, my former past is I was a police officer for 30 years with the city of Miami. I was also a hostage negotiator with the city of Miami in the direction of the city of Miami SWAT team. Most of our negotiations were with family members, husbands holding their wife and kids hostage. Some of them unfortunately ended up in murder, suicide. We've had guests on our show that hired Gotham Investigations to conduct surveillances on their spouses. These are relationships that's gone bad. Some of them had quite a lot of violence in their relationships. But I noticed as police officers, when I've gotten to talk to some of these women, they're afraid to get out of these relationships that have abuse. And what I've kind of found, and after interviewing some of these people, is when they get physically abused, when they get punched, when they get hit, and the husband or wife finally stops the beating, there's kind of like pleasure sensors that kind of go off in the spouse's head that the beating's finally over, and their body kind of seeks that same feeling of pleasure, of relief, just like you would on a drug, crack cocaine, where you're always seeking that high again. And they feel not only scared to get out of the relationship, but they also look forward to that week of peace that comes after the beating. What have you experienced with violent relationships, and how can you adjust this behavior amongst a couple?
Well, Jeff, I like the wording that you use. Relationship that's going bad. I think that the verbatim there, it emphasizes the process that is behind it. So it's not a picture, a one-time state, but it is a process, and it's a process to get there. So there is a prevention piece that we can tackle, and of course, and there is the aftermath, like you mentioned. Once I am making a decision to get out of it, how difficult it is, and the central part, while you are in it, and someone may claim that you're always going to be in it somehow because of the traumas. While you are in it, how can you manage it, and how can you keep moving forward? I think fear. You mentioned fear. Definitely, it's one of the main emotions there. It's not just fear of the physical aspect, which I think it's one of the minor ones in terms of statistics. I think fear starts in different places: emotional, psychological fears, and then of course the most visible, which is the physical one. I think that having a context, a system that is so much fulfilled with fear, it's a system that is very, very hard to change.
How would you approach a couple that came in and, the husband saying, agreeing that he had some physical abuse? Would you have separate sessions with each individual, or would you have them both together? And how would you approach giving them therapy to stop this type of behavior?
Yeah, definitely there is not a one formula fits all, but definitely including and offering the possibility to work individually, it is very much not just a possibility, but sometimes a necessity. Sometimes relationships are so exhausted from any type of communication, and fear is so much of a big factor that conjunctive communication is not possible. So the couple, the family, is not there yet. That's when individual conversations might be useful or necessary.
Do you go back in their relationship of where they met, where the violence started, and have you found that some of that goes back to maybe even their childhood, where that individual was abused as a child, now he carries that abuse and takes it out on the spouse?
No, without getting too much in the theories, of course, the philosophy of what I do, it's that's, you know, talking about the past is a must. I think the comment that I can make is how do we address the past? So do we want to address the past from a blaming standpoint, right? So someone is abusive because he was or she was abused in her past. Sure, we can make certain correlations. I don't necessarily think it might be useful for a therapeutic change. So the way that I prefer to address the past is learning from it in terms of strengths, in terms of strengths first, in terms of what made sense in the past. So a behavior that was useful or necessary in the past, I was possibly even survival. You know, I needed to be angry when I'm not heard, because that's the only way that I used to get heard, you know, is when I get angry. It may have made sense in the past, it might not make sense now anymore. So learning that past and learning that background in order to understand the possible transition out of that. It's a way to look at the past that, in my opinion, it's more constructive than simply pinpointing where something went wrong.
Now, how do you handle a lot of these relationships start out going in the wrong direction because one of the spouses is either suffering from anxiety, depression, maybe even loss of a loved one that they can't get over, and that creates an internal negativity in the relationship? How do you address those situations?
I think there is a lot of role modeling in what I do, in what a therapeutic session looks like. So, you know, there are these big elephants, you know, the mental health diagnosis in relationships. You know, someone comes in and says, you know, my spouse is a narcissist, or I'm struggling because my spouse is depressed. So there are these big elephants in the room of their relationship. That's on the elephant itself is not necessarily a problem. So my duty there is to I want to say educate or facilitate the educational process for the couple to transform their room, right, in a place where they can safely and respectfully address that elephant.
You mentioned narcissism. We have so many clients that they kind of self-diagnose their spouse with narcissism, and we've had a couple of them, and you'll see some of those episodes coming up. But explain about narcissism and exactly what it is and how to identify it.
I mention it on purpose because I know it's a very trendy mostly self-diagnosed, or Dr. Google diagnose. And the reason why I mentioned the narcissist diagnosis is because in the moment that a person identifies, you know, the label and then labels the other as narcissist or as depressed, right there is a closure. Right there, the communication hits a huge limit. There is in the communication where there is a recipient and so there is a listener and a talker, right? And there's the alternating, the flowing between the two. So both people have both roles. They alternate both roles. In the moment that there is a labeling, those roles become much more stiff. Because, well, Stefano, of course they become more stable because the other one is a narcissist. So my job there is to soften those boundaries in a way that that can be a more open understanding. And with more open understanding, I don't mean that you accept everything that the other person does. I think a more open understanding is to allow a better communication around what it is. So that's the goal number one, with the possible outcome that that couple is still going to end up not together. So not necessarily the outcome is what I'm aiming to, although of course everybody wants the fairy tale to end up in a good way, but it's to empower both people, or possibly even more, when there are children inside, like all the family members, to empower all of them to go through the process in a more confident way.
How can a person identify narcissistic behavior before it gets develops into a higher level?
I think it's about listening to the other person. So inviting more questions, inviting more communication. What do you mean by that?
The behavioral pattern. How can I identify it?
I wouldn't say, I wouldn't, so if we start the journey of looking for something, as you know better, we're probably going to find something. So although people that come to my office are very much in distress, usually the average time that a couple waits to seek therapy is 7 years. It's going slowly down, but it's still, that's the average time. So the level of exhaustion, so usually the phrase that I hear is, I've already tried that. So, and that's what he does, that's what she does, right? So there is a list of behaviors. So again, my job is to stay away from that investigator type of mindset, because their ultimate goal is to find more peace, individually and in the relationship. Doesn't matter where the relationship goes, there is still an emotion attached to it, right? Like we mentioned earlier, even for those relationships that do end and they were impregnated with fear, that fear doesn't matter if the relationship is broken up, the fear stays, and that fear needs to be healed.
So even as a therapist, you don't like to pretty much label somebody and isolate them where you kind of have tunnel vision, because you want to kind of leave your mind open as well of how you can evolve with this couple and get them to work with each other.
I'm glad that I show my resistance in a collaborative way. Yes, that's exactly a good point, yes. I think I stay away from my goal, my objective is to open the vision rather than.
So we also come across, quite often relationships that start going bad after a child when, say, the mother has like a postpartum depression afterwards. How do you work with females that are going through that, and is that like a very difficult part of relationships?
And the addition of a member in a relationship, we mentioned systems. The addition of a member in a system is a huge, it has a huge impact. Of course, my expertise here, it's even more based on the communication piece. And when we were mentioning my experience in the soccer, in the football world, as a professional athlete, I will never have the possibility to experience how it is to be a mother or how to have postpartum depression. I might have the possibility to experience as a father how it is that the birth of a child impacts my relationship. That, yes. So how do I help the woman? I think it's even more. I think, how do I help the system? How do I help the family? So that includes the husband. I think the approach of how do I help the woman is most of the time emphasizing that there is something, that she is somehow at fault. There is something went wrong, right? So how to restore, and when I say restore, it's not going back, because of course we are in a new reality now. There is a child, right? So, but how to restore the room, right? The relationship room, in a way that even this reaction, even this postpartum depression, right? If we want to use the diagnosing term. So how to shape the room in a way that reaction is not catastrophic.
So one of the women that we had on our show that was explaining that she had heightened orgasms through asphyxiation her husband was doing, and it just escalated till the point where her husband started cutting her with a knife, and that relationship went out. But a lot of these relationships, when we talk and we interview the individuals that are hiring us, they say that the sex life is kind of like flattened out. Mm-hmm. I'm sure that a lot of people come to you and they ask for advice on that. You have that. Most of the women say, well, there's no foreplay anymore in our relationship, type of thing. My husband just wants them. We're like, well, we just want to investigate, follow your, we're not here to give you any advice on our side, but you have that Italian voice that is kind of like your foreplay when you walk in the room. People my age, the only foreplay we get is driving around the block before we pick up the hooker, type of thing. So on your case, when they come to you and they say nothing's going on in the bedroom, what do you tell them? How do you give them a little boost to better that situation?
Everybody is exotic in somewhere, so I think my accent works for non-Italians. So with this accent, what do I say? I mean, the romance, and the maintenance of the romance, it's a huge topic. It's a never-ending topic at every phase of the relationship. Someone may argue that woman, that relationship that went too violent, someone may argue that that's part of eroticism. So it's a very customized, very, very personal concept. And for that reason, the way that I handle that conversation is, first of all, starting from asking what is romanticism, what is foreplay for someone, what is their picture of it. For this woman, asphyxiation was possibly part of it. When it went to seeing blood, that was past her threshold. So for other women, maybe even asphyxiation is way past what they want or what they need.
Medication. A lot of therapists assign medication before they even find out or diagnose a patient. Are you favorable for medication, or do you kind of resolve the issue and address them before you would subscribe any medication to your clients?
So, with my degree as a PhD candidate now, but as a PhD I will not be able to prescribe medication. So medications, it's a matter of psychiatrists or general physicians. My personal take on medication is, without getting politically involved, whether I agree with medications or not, I think that they do have an impact, a physiological and a psychological impact. The physiological, I think, is the most obvious, but I think the psychological part is what I would like to focus on, and what I do focus on is what is the relationship with the medication? What's the investment that the person has in the relationship with the medication? What are the hopes? What does it mean for someone to take medication? You know, more and more clients, assuming that I do prescribe medication, they approach me saying, you know, I really would like to stay away from medications. I really hate to, recently a mother told me, I really hate to know that I'm preparing my child to be addicted to substances. So that's, you know, that is a very, very common understanding, and I think that that's where my job, I think, comes easier, because there is already, the system is preparing for the, you know, I want to say more holistic, although if we really talk about holistic, medications are included in it, but you know, a more holistic, where there is more of a trust into what as human beings we can do, even without the utilization of external agents.
And children, we get a lot of couples in here, you know, talk about their children, investigating their teenagers to see if they're part of a gang. But a lot of mothers, when we hired to follow the husband, or husbands to follow the wife, the child is the one that's sacrificed. They have little kids in a divorce, 5, 6 years old. Some of them aren't married, but the battle between them becomes a war with the child. The father or the mother might not even care about the child, but the fact that the other one has money, they try to get joint custody. And we followed many of them around, and we've observed that they're not even with the child when they have them. The nanny has them, someone else has them. How an impact does this have on children, and how do you address a 5-year-old that's going through a divorce with his parents?
It's a beautiful question, and that's the reason why in my practice there is no way that I see a 5-year-old alone. Meaning, I can, right? I think there are beautiful work that can be done with individually with a 5-year-old. I think until we address the relationship aspect with his or her parents, we're only addressing the tip of the iceberg. So individually we can work with, and I say we, as you know, all my colleagues, individually with the child we can work on their coping skills, their resources, their confidence, their self-esteem, and their communication skills, and how they can maneuver all that in a toxic family environment. Again, until we don't address that environment itself, we're staying on the surface level. So I always involve the parents when, of course, they are available. Sometimes, as you mentioned, they are not. Sometimes only one is available, and the other one is agreeing with keeping it like that. And sometimes, unfortunately, the one not available is preventing therapy to even happen.
So I want to touch a little bit on the subconscious mind, you know, how important it is to tap in and have today's world, everyone's addicted to the cell phones type of thing. Everyone's addicted to these TikTok, social rooms, social media, all these apps that are out there. How do you address a child that's addicted to something like this, or a teenager that's just part of the social media craze and can't let go to spend time with his friends or his family?
I think the beauty of the systemic relational approach is that there is an expansion of the topic. So the topic of addiction to a device, the topic of the addiction to a medication is looked from the relational standpoint. So in your example, what is the impact that cell phone, in this case, is having in the child's life? Is it preventing socialization? Is it preventing from homework to be completed? Is it causing fights at home? I think starting from what are the impacts in the child's life from their point of view also, not just from the parent's standpoint. I think it's a very powerful beginning that can open the doors to then the exploration of really child's values. So that my job is not limiting the utilization of the device, but it's enhancing the values, and most of the times, always I would say, when there is a deeper connection with the values, usually the time on the device decreases automatically, because kids tend to love more social and productive, even if it's on the device, but more productive and constructive activities.
So we kind of know, being involved in the mafia background, I want to say, with the Italians and the Godfather, how they say revenge is best served cold. The problem also with these devices, even with former presidents and the heat of the moment, even with spouses, is what heightens the madness, where you tweet something out or you text your spouse, F you or F that, and you don't give a chance for your subconscious to kick in. So years ago, you would sit down and you would write a letter. Now that letter has to go on the desk, and now you're going to mail it to your brother in another state or something, and the next day you wake up and you're like, you know what, I'm not going to send that letter out, because your subconscious kicked in and says, Stefano, that might not be a good idea to send that out, because you're going to create a family war. But in today's society, that goes out within a minute, where your subconscious doesn't kick in. How do you train somebody to use their subconscious mind to their advantage?
I agree. I think there is a much more of a quicker, and unfortunately in the higher speed, there is a loss of quality in the human relationships and communication. I think when you mention subconscious, I think there is very much of the unconscious working in the quick texting, the reactive FU, right? There is very much of the unconscious operating there, and it's an unconscious part that is trained, because of the fast pace of society, to be reactive. So one metaphor to explain subconscious is when we are at the wheel, when we're driving, there is a automatic pilot kicking in. We're thinking about the soccer game that we're going to, we're thinking about the client that we saw the other day, we're thinking about how to write that proposal in a more convincing way for a grant. In the meantime, we're going through traffic lights, we're going through turns, through highway exits, right? And that's where the subconscious is operating, and it's an extremely reliable and well-trained subconscious. And so many times we get to our destination and we don't know how. Do we really remember how many times we put our foot on the brake? No, right? Yet we've done it many times. We're probably gonna do it after this interview. Thinking back about it, so I think the unconscious is always working and it's always training. So I think that putting an emphasis on zooming in on what we do, what are the little things that we do in our everyday life that are contributing to what we then will do when we are not fully conscious. So can we somehow be more attentive? Not necessarily in communication, but can we be more attentive of how we take a sip of water, and then from the understanding of we do everything like we do anything. If I take the next sip of water with a certain conscious mind, that same pattern is going to be replicated when we are not so conscious.
Kind of like muscle memory. And that's what we do in the martial arts. I had a karate school that I ran for 10 years as well. 3rd degree black belt in American Kempo Karate at Parker System, but we train muscle memory. Not specific patterns and techniques, but muscle memory, how to react. And that kind of goes into what you're saying, the conscious and the subconscious mind. So you're licensed in the state of Florida, any other states?
That's it for now, yeah. I'm waiting for the board, the American Association of Family Therapy, to open the borders. That's the conversation that has been happening mostly after COVID and the remote working boom. But as of now, these are my license state limitations. I can only see clients who reside in Florida, which of course it's a very blurry and a very difficult task to obtain when there might be some lying involved.
So I don't see why not. The borders are opened every other damn place. They might as well open the borders in your industry. But with that being said, if somebody wanted to do a Zoom from another state, would you be able to do that? And if not, what's the reasoning behind why they don't want that to be done?
The reason why the state limitations were in place in the first time, it was due to, as many regulations in my field, is to protect the clients. So in the case that the client is in danger for himself, in case of suicidal ideation, or in danger for others, as we mentioned, in a violent relationship, or in the case that the client is showing homicidal statements. Having a therapist more local and more connected with the resources that are around the client is, of course, it's understandably it's a safer way to operate. Now with the remote work, if I see someone in Tallahassee, if I see someone in Key West through Zoom, that is, of course, is decreasing, right? That connection with the local resources is nevertheless decreasing. So the board is still trying to hold on to the state regulations, so to the state limitations of the licenses. But I think regulations are going to be eventually implemented in a way that there is a nationwide network of resources that can be accessed by any client. Doesn't matter how remote you are.
And how many sessions do you find that it usually takes to see a difference? And of course, I'm sure you have people that come in and are closed-minded, and that doesn't go anywhere. But a couple that comes in and both want to make a difference. How long do you think it takes to actually start seeing a difference outside of your practice when they go home?
I like to start every session with the understanding that it might be the last one. A little bit comes from my background training, in brief therapy. A little bit comes from my own personal understanding that I want to, because I want to empower the clients that I have in front of me. That session, that conversation might leave something that is enough of a change for them to go on their own. Doesn't mean that it's going to be perfect, but it's enough of a change that they can walk in a slightly different way.
How important is it? I know you mentioned that kind of relationships are kind of going bad, and it's usually within 7 years they finally come to see you. How important is it to not wait, even if you're having a good relationship, to maybe once a year come see somebody like yourself and just discuss the relationships and and they might see things, and you might see things that are going wrong along the way, and say, I think you better start going in this direction, because you can put scenarios in front of them of what might happen in your crystal ball if they don't.
It's hard for me to answer the question without making a sales pitch.
Well, we want to hear your sales pitch. That's what we're here for as well. Because we want to get people help out there. We want to bring them to your practice.
Thank you, Jeff, for bringing awareness. I think you mentioned, the yearly. I use the example of the dentist. It's so common. It's so accepted to have at least a yearly checkup. Now it became twice a year. A yearly checkup with a dentist. Unfortunately, that's not the practice yet in my field, and I think that I cannot express how vital it is, because the more science progress and the more there is the understanding that psychosomatic symptoms are indeed a thing. And so our state of mind, our mental health, whatever we want to call it, or the health of our subconscious, it does have an impact on our physiology. So it does have an impact even on our teeth.
How do you address, I'm sure you have first responders that come see you because their relationships are going bad, nurses, firemen, police officers, which has a high divorce rate. I would always put myself in a scenario that I'd be in patrol, or I'd be in the street narcotics unit, hostage scene where somebody murders somebody. Then you go home and the wife is expecting to go to the movies, and you just saw that car accident with a lady that got killed with her daughter, and you're sitting in the movie theater. Obviously it affects you no matter how cold you get throughout your career. How do you address that, and how do you make the spouse understand that it's kind of like not an identifiable post-traumatic stress syndrome, but it's kind of like the way that individual's reacting that's going to reflect on the movies, going out to dinner, that force field is going to be up, and they just might be cold to their partner.
Yeah. I think what you mentioned about the partner understanding, it's a huge part of what the goal of therapy in these cases is. And as we mentioned earlier, communication being a duo process, there is a listener and there is a talker, and those roles alternate. Having the explainer role also perfection, mastered, it has an equal value in my goals. So to again educate the relationship, to allow explanations and understandings to be attuned, to be in the same language, so that so maybe that the explanations don't have to be as long, because that's exhausting in itself, right? Continuing to explain sometimes brings to exhaustion. Continuing to try to understand is exhaustive. So develop a common language that allows the feeling of being heard. Ultimately, it's a fundamental in those cases.
And what was your thesis paper based on, if you don't mind me asking?
Of course. I'm so excited about it. It's about hypnotherapy, and not only hypnotherapy, but it's about tele-hypnotherapy. So I'm interviewing clinicians who has transitioned the hypnotherapy practice from a solely in-person to an online setting, and ask them about their experience and what they are. What are the factors that I can maintain? What are the similarities, and even more, beside of the comparison between the in-person and the remote work, what is that stays true in a conversation, mostly when there is the unconscious piece? What is still in place what is the human part that doesn't go when physically we're not here together, that we can still tap on.
Can you define hypnotherapy for us?
In a nutshell, hypnotherapy is a different way to have a conversation. The majority of my hypnotherapy sessions are done through what is called the informal hypnotherapy. So there is not any pendulum, there is not any type of counting down to an unconscious place, but it's a more holistic way to understand conversations, which is not simply the verbal, the rational one, but it's beyond that.
And both of your parents are Italian, your mother and your father?
Yeah, when I did my family tree, I tracked down the only other Stefano in the family was born in the early 1800s, and he was from the same exact area. So I have 5 generations from Cremona. Yeah, so both my parents are from there too.
And you have family here in Miami as well?
I'm the only one here. Yeah, my brother comes to visit. He's the closest family member I can say that it's physically here.
So give us a good Italian version of your name. Pronounce it.
I think you did a wonderful job. You didn't have to even rehearse it. Yeah, it's Stefano Fanfoni.
That's great. Well, this is Gotham Investigations. Save your relationship. Don't wait to come to us to follow your spouse around. If you think something is wrong, something is usually wrong. Come see this man, just like the dentist. He's going to not only fix your teeth because you're going to have a big smile after you see him, you're going to fix your relationship and be happy. Thank you for tuning in to this episode, and stay tuned for our next one. Are you a fan of our show? Do you like our show? Then comment, hit the like button, and subscribe, or you might be the next one we investigate.